Those with weak hearts do not watch this video. In a remote town, there was an abandoned hospital. The hospital was built in the early 20th century, but was closed after a series of horrific events that left a bad reputation behind. Some say the hospital was the site of inhumane medical experiments, and that the spirits of the patients who died horrifically still haunt the place. On a dark night, a group of paranormal researchers decided to explore the hospital. The group consisted of 5 people: Youssef, Wissam, Layla, Nader, and Nora. They were armed with paranormal detection devices, cameras, and powerful flashlights. As they entered the hospital, they were greeted by the smell of mold and old blood. The walls were covered with dark brown stains, as if telling the story of the horror that took place there. They proceeded cautiously through the dark corridors, their footsteps echoing around them. As they wandered, they began to hear the muffled sounds of screams coming from a distant room. They approached cautiously and opened the door to find themselves in an old operating room. Surgical tools were strewn about haphazardly, as if someone had left the place in a hurry. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut and the flashlights went out. They began to feel a powerful, terrifying presence around them. The ghost of a blood-stained surgeon appeared before them, holding an old surgical saw. The ghost whispered incomprehensible words, but the malice and pain were clear in his eyes. The ghost started approaching Youssef, who was holding the camera. Youssef tried to retreat, but he felt a cold hand gripping his wrist tightly. He screamed in pain as his hand began to bleed profusely, as if something invisible was stabbing him with sharp blades. At that moment, ghosts of former patients emerged from the darkness, some with amputated limbs and missing eyes, slowly moving toward the friends. Nader and Layla screamed in terror as the ghosts began tearing their clothes and leaving bloody wounds on their bodies. The floor beneath their feet became slick with blood that started seeping from the walls, as if the building itself were bleeding. Nader and Sam tried to pull Youssef away, but they faced an unnatural resistance. The ghosts held them tightly, and one of the ghosts drove a rusty needle into Sam's arm, causing him to scream in pain and collapse to the ground. His body began to writhe as if poison were coursing through his veins, while the ghosts surrounded him. As Layla and Nora tried to open the door, the floor began to shake violently, and decayed hands emerged from the ground, grabbing their feet and attempting to pull them down. The hands gripped them with increasing force, leaving behind trails of blood and deep wounds. Amidst the chaos, Nora managed to find an old hammer and used it to break the door. It was as if the hospital itself was trying to trap them. They quickly fled the hospital, but Youssef and Sam were not with them. When they turned back to look for them, they found their bodies lying on the ground, covered in deep wounds as if they had been brutally attacked. Their eyes were wide open, reflecting the horror of their final moments. The 3 remaining friends fled the hospital, dragging themselves with difficulty, but the horror was not over. The storm outside raged fiercely, and the sky was lit up by lightning that revealed the eerie building. They felt that something was pursuing them, something relentless and merciless. As they moved a bit further away from the hospital, they heard the screams of Youssef and Sam echoing in the air, as if the hospital still held their souls. They turned quickly but saw nothing but absolute darkness. They decided to keep running towards the car they had left not far away. As they ran through the forest, they sensed an unseen presence around them. Ghosts of the patients began to appear among the trees, chasing them with their amputated limbs and disfigured faces. There was a ghost of a small child, screaming and running towards them with severed arms, his face marked with signs of torment. Layla screamed at the top of her lungs as she felt a cold hand pulling her backward. Nader quickly turned to see a ghost resembling the surgeon they saw in the hospital, grabbing Layla, dragging her into the darkness. Nader tried to pull her away, but he felt a sharp pain in his back as another ghost drove a rusty surgical scalpel into his skin. Blood began to flow profusely, and the pain was unbearable. Nora managed to lift a thick stick she found on the ground and began striking the ghosts desperately, trying to free Layla and Nader. But the ghosts were too numerous, and the ground beneath them started to crack open, with decayed hands emerging, attempting to pull them downward. In a moment of desperation, Nora decided to use her lighter to ignite some dry branches around them. The flames rose quickly, illuminating the area slightly and forcing the ghosts to retreat a bit. But they didn't have much time, as the fire wasn't strong enough to deter them for long. They ran towards the car, their bodies weighed down by wounds and blood. When they finally reached the car, they quickly began to climb in. But as they tried to start the engine, a ghostly hand emerged from the darkness and gripped the car's engine, preventing their escape. The ghosts began to gather around the car, pressing against the windows and attempting to enter. Their faces were smeared with blood, and their red eyes gleamed with vengeance. At the last moment, Nora managed to start the engine, and the car sped off at full speed. The ghosts chased them even on the road, but the car was faster. They fled the city in disbelief over what they had experienced. They left the hospital behind them, but the horror they witnessed would remain etched in their memories forever. When they arrived in the next city, they knew their lives would never be the same, and they would never forget that terrifying night at the Hospital of Shadows.